The lock on the back door clicked shut before Claire Bennett even realized she was the last one left in the building. She looked up from the folding table, her hands still buried in a mountain of warm towels, and called out toward the front office. No one answered. The radio that Grace always kept playing behind the counter had gone silent. The overhead lights in the far hallway, the ones that led to the loading dock, had been switched off. "Grace?" Claire called again, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked toward the front of the building. "Henry, are you still here?" Nothing came back except the low hum of the dryers behind her, still spinning, still tumbling someone else's Christmas Eve linens. She reached the front counter and found it empty. Grace's coat, the thick red one she always complained about because it made her look like a walking stop sign, was gone from the hook by the door. Henry's clipboard, usually left open on the counter with the day's delivery schedule, had been closed and set neatly to the side, like someone had tidied up before leaving in a hurry. Claire checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. Just the time, glowing in the corner of the screen, 9:42 in the evening, on the 24th of December. She walked the length of the main floor once more, checking each doorway out of habit, half expecting to find Grace crouched behind a machine, laughing at some joke that had gone too far. The break room was empty, the coffee pot switched off, a half-eaten sandwich abandoned on the counter, as though someone had walked away from it mid-bite. That detail unsettled her more than the silence itself. People did not leave food behind, unless something had pulled them away suddenly, without warning, without the chance to finish even the smallest task. The office behind the front counter told the same story. A cardigan still hung over the back of a chair. A mug of tea, gone cold, sat beside a stack of invoices that had been left half-sorted. Whatever had happened tonight, it had happened fast, and it had happened to everyone at once, which meant it could not have been a simple family emergency or a sudden change of plans. Emergencies were messy. This was not messy. This was organized, deliberate, the kind of departure that came from an instruction followed rather than a crisis endured. Claire had grown up learning to read rooms carefully, a skill her mother had taught her without ever meaning to, through years of watching her mother read the moods of employers and landlords, and everyone else who held some small piece of power over their lives. She had learned to notice when something in a space did not match the story being told about it. Whitmore Linen and Laundry Service had never quite matched its own story, not from the first week she worked there, and tonight, standing alone in its empty, too quiet hallways, she understood that more clearly than she ever had before. She was supposed to have been relieved 2 hours ago. Grace had promised to cover the closing shift so Claire could get home before the roads turned bad, so she could see her mother for at least part of the holiday. But Grace was gone, and so was Henry, and so, it seemed, was everyone else who worked at Whitmore Linen and Laundry Service. Claire told herself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone had gotten sick, or a pipe had burst somewhere in the building, and everyone had rushed to deal with it, without thinking to find her first. She had only been working here for 2 months, hired quickly after her last job at a dry cleaner closed down, and she still didn't know all of the informal rules the way the others seemed to. She walked back through the main floor, past the long rows of industrial washers, their round doors like giant eyes watching her cross the room. The building was larger than it needed to be for a simple laundry service. She had noticed that on her first day, the way the hallways stretched further back than made sense, the way there were rooms with frosted glass doors that no one ever explained to her, the way deliveries sometimes came in through the loading dock at strange hours, driven by men who never once smiled or made small talk. She had asked Grace about it once, casually, over a shared lunch break. "Some of our clients like their privacy," Grace had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Hotels, restaurants, people who don't want their business getting out. You know how it is." Claire hadn't pushed. The pay was good, better than it should have been for folding towels and running industrial machines, and she needed the money too badly to ask questions that might cost her the job. Now, standing alone in the empty building with the storm building outside the front windows, she wished she had asked more. She tried the front door first, locked. The heavy deadbolt turned from the outside, the kind that could not be opened without a key. She tried the back door next, the one near the loading dock, locked as well. The same solid click she had heard minutes before. The sound she now understood had been the building sealing itself around her, Panic rose in her chest, quick and sharp, and she pushed it down the way she always did, the way she had learned to do since she was a girl. Panic didn't solve anything. Thinking did. She pulled out her phone again and called Grace. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried Henry next, and got the same result. She sent a text to both of them, simple, controlled, no exclamation points to give away how frightened she actually was. "I think I got locked in. Can someone come open the door?" No reply came. Outside, the wind had picked up, throwing sheets of snow sideways past the windows, turning the streetlights into blurred orange smudges. The storm the news had been warning about for 2 days had finally arrived, right on schedule, right when she needed the roads to be clear the most. Claire walked back to the folding table and sat down on the stool beside it, trying to think clearly. She had her phone, though the battery was already dropping fast in the cold building. She had food, technically, since the small break room had a vending machine and a coffee maker. She had heat, for now. She was not in immediate danger. She simply needed to wait until someone realized their mistake and came back for her, or until morning, when someone would surely arrive to open the building for the day's deliveries. It was the reasonable thought. It was the thought that let her breathe evenly again. She almost believed it, right up until she heard the sound of a car pulling into the back lot. Headlights swept briefly across the frosted glass of the loading dock door, cutting through the snow, then went dark. Claire stood up so fast, the stool scraped loudly against the floor. Relief flooded through her first, quick and instinctive. Someone had come. Someone had realized the mistake. She hurried toward the back hallway, ready to call out, ready to explain how she had been left behind, how grateful she was that someone had come back for her on a night like this. Then she heard the voices. 2 men, maybe 3, speaking low and fast near the loading dock, their words swallowed by the wind, and the heavy door between them and her. She couldn't make out what they were saying, only the tone, controlled and businesslike, the tone of men who did this kind of thing, often enough that urgency never showed on the surface. Claire stopped in the hallway, one hand pressed flat against the cold brick wall. Something told her, some instinct she couldn't name, that these were not people coming to let her out. She stepped back into the shadow of the hallway just as the loading dock door began to rise, the old metal track groaning under its own weight, letting in a rush of freezing air and a swirl of snow that scattered across the concrete floor. A man stepped through first. Tall, dressed in a dark wool coat far too fine for a laundry service loading dock, his shoes making almost no sound despite the scattered snow beneath them. 2 other men followed close behind him, one carrying a case, the other watching the street behind them, even as the door rolled shut again, sealing out the storm. Claire pressed herself further into the shadows, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain they would hear it over the wind still rattling the windows at the front of the building. The tall man in the wool coat stopped near the center of the loading area and looked around the space slowly, the way someone looks at a room they expect to be empty, checking it out of habit rather than concern. "Building's clear," one of the other men said. "Everyone left an hour ago, like you told them to." "Good," the tall man answered. His voice was low, even, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to carry weight. "We won't be long." Claire's mind raced. "Everyone left an hour ago, like you told them to." The words repeated themselves in her head, cold and sharp as the wind outside. This hadn't been a mistake. Grace hadn't forgotten her. Henry hadn't simply left in a hurry. Someone had told them to leave, had emptied the building on purpose, for this. For whatever this was. She should have called out. She should have stepped forward and explained that she was still here, that there had been some kind of oversight, that she only wanted to go home. But something in the tall man's voice, in the careful way the other 2 moved around him, kept her frozen where she stood, half hidden by the wall, watching a scene she was clearly never meant to see. The man with the case set it down on a metal table near the folding machines, and opened it. Claire couldn't see what was inside from where she stood, only the way the tall man leaned over it briefly, his expression unreadable in the dim emergency lighting that had replaced the main overhead lamps. "Everything is where it should be," the tall man said after a moment. "Tell him we're satisfied." The words meant nothing to Claire, not specifically, but the atmosphere in the room told her enough. This was not an ordinary delivery. This was not an ordinary business. She shifted her weight, trying to ease the ache building in her legs from standing so still for so long, and her foot caught the edge of a plastic laundry bin, left near the hallway entrance. It scraped against the concrete, a small sound, barely anything at all. But in the silence of the loading dock, it might as well have been a gunshot. All three men turned toward the hallway at once. Claire's breath caught in her throat. There was no time to run. Nowhere to run to even if there had been time. The hallway behind her leading only deeper into the building, toward rooms she had never been allowed to enter, doors she had never once seen opened. The tall man in the wool coat took a single step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the shadows where she stood. "Come out," he said, his voice quiet but absolute, the voice of a man used to being obeyed without question. "I know someone is there." Claire's hands trembled against the cold brick wall. She thought of the locked front door, the locked back door, the storm outside sealing off every road that might have led her away from this building and this moment. She thought of Grace's red coat missing from its hook, of Henry's clipboard closed and tidied, of every quiet oddity about this place she had chosen to ignore because she needed the paycheck too badly to ask questions. She had wondered, more than once, what kind of business truly moved through Whitmore Linen and Laundry Service. She was about to find out. Slowly, with her heart pounding so hard it hurt, Claire stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light of the loading dock, raising both hands slightly at her sides, palms open, the universal signal of someone who meant no harm, and hoped very much that the same courtesy would be returned to her. The tall man studied her for a long moment, his expression giving away nothing at all. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first assumed, maybe only a few years older than herself, though something about the stillness in his face made him seem far older, far more tired than his years should have allowed. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't really a question, it was an assessment. "Claire," she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. "I work here. I got left behind. The door locked and I couldn't get out, and then I heard you come in, and I didn't know what to do, so I stayed quiet, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to see anything. I'll just go back to the front and wait. I won't say a word to anyone, I promise." "Stop!" the man said, not unkindly, but firmly enough that she obeyed instantly. He glanced at the two men beside him. Something passed between them, a silent exchange that Claire couldn't read, but understood was important. Understood was about her, about what to do with a laundry worker who had just watched a delivery she was never supposed to see. "She's nobody," one of the men said quietly. "Just clean it up and move on." The tall man didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on Claire, steady and considering, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself holding perfectly still under that gaze, the way a person holds still in front of something dangerous, hoping stillness might be mistaken for harmlessness. Outside, the wind howled against the loading dock door, rattling it in its frame, and somewhere far off a siren wailed and faded, swallowed by the storm. The tall man finally spoke, his voice quiet enough that only Claire and the two men beside him could hear it. "Nobody is going anywhere tonight," he said. "Not in this weather. Not until I decide what to do about this." Claire's stomach dropped. The storm had trapped her here as surely as the locked doors had, and now she understood, with a cold certainty that settled deep in her chest, that the man standing in front of her held far more power over the rest of her night, possibly the rest of her life, than any storm ever could. She had come to work that morning, expecting nothing more than a long, quiet Christmas Eve shift folding towels and listening to Grace complain about the cold. Instead, she was standing in the middle of a business she was never meant to witness, facing a man whose calm, careful voice frightened her more than shouting ever could, with the storm outside sealing every exit and the whole building silent except for the sound of dryers still spinning somewhere behind her, tumbling towels that no one would come to collect tonight. Whatever was about to happen, she understood one thing with total clarity. She was not walking out of this building the same person who had walked in. The tall man introduced himself only after several long seconds of silence, and even then, he gave her nothing more than a name. "Damien," he said. "Sit down. You look like you might fall over." Claire didn't move at first. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but sitting down in front of a stranger, who had just caught her spying on whatever business he was conducting, felt like the wrong kind of surrender. the kind that made her feel even more powerless than she already did. "I'm fine standing," she said, though her voice wavered slightly on the last word. Damien studied her for a moment longer, then turned to the two men beside him. "Finish loading the case. I'll deal with this." The men exchanged another look, one that Claire still couldn't read, before moving to obey without argument. That told her something important, something she filed away carefully even through her fear. Whoever Damien was, the other two men answered to him without question, without hesitation, the way soldiers answer to an officer they respect and fear in equal measure. Claire watched the two men walk away, noting the quiet, practiced way they moved, the way neither of them questioned the order or looked back to see it carried out. Whoever Damien was, within whatever organization ran through this building, his authority was not the kind that needed reinforcing. It was simply understood, the way weather was understood, something you planned around rather than argued with. She thought briefly of running, of using the moment, while his attention was divided, to slip back toward the front of the building and try the doors again, hoping against reason that one of them might have been left unlocked in the chaos. But she dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arrived. There was nowhere to run to inside a sealed building, and even if there had been, something about the calm, deliberate way Damien carried himself told her that running would only convince him she was a problem rather than a person, and problems in his world were handled very differently from people. Once they had stepped away toward the far end of the loading dock, Damien turned his full attention back to Claire. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again, the kind of look that felt less like suspicion and more like careful measurement, as though he were trying to decide what kind of person had just stepped out of the shadows in front of him. Claire held his gaze despite the fear still tightening her chest, some instinct telling her that looking away now would only make her seem less trustworthy in his eyes. "You work here," he said. "How long?" 2 months, Claire answered. "I fold linens. I run the machines. I don't know anything about deliveries or clients or whatever it is you do here after hours. I swear I don't." "I believe you," Damien said, and something in his tone made her think he actually meant it. "That doesn't change the problem." "What problem?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked slowly toward the folding table where she had been working before everything changed, his eyes moving over the stacks of towels, the industrial machines, the ordinary details of a job that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the life she had built for herself before tonight. "You saw men bring a case into a laundry service on Christmas Eve," he said finally. "You heard them say the building had been emptied on purpose. That is not the kind of thing people forget by morning." Claire's mouth went dry. "I won't tell anyone. I don't even know what was in the case. I don't want to know. I just want to go home." "I understand that," Damien said. "Understanding it and trusting it are different things." The wind outside grew louder, pressing against the loading dock door hard enough to make the metal groan in its frame. Somewhere behind them, one of the dryers finished its cycle with a soft chime, the sound absurdly ordinary against the tension filling the room. Damien glanced toward the sound, then back at Claire. For the first time, something in his expression shifted, not quite softening, but changing, the careful blankness giving way to something closer to calculation. "The roads are already closing," he said. "I checked before we came in. There's no getting you home tonight. Not safely, not in this storm." "Then let me stay here," Claire said quickly. "Alone. I'll wait in the break room until morning. You can lock the doors again. I won't go near whatever you're doing back there." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, and Claire had the strange sensation of watching a man weigh a decision that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with something far more serious. Something that involved her safety in ways she didn't fully understand yet. "Because right now," he said finally, "you are a witness to something that could get a lot of people hurt, including you, if the wrong person finds out you were here tonight. Leaving you alone in this building is not protecting you. It's exposing you." Claire felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though she hadn't moved at all. "Exposing me to who?" Damien didn't answer that question either. Instead, he turned toward the two men still working near the far wall and called out something Claire couldn't quite hear, low and clipped, the kind of instruction meant to end a conversation rather than start one. One of the men, the shorter of the two, walked over a moment later, glancing at Claire with an expression she couldn't read, before addressing Damien directly. "You want her in the back room?" "For now," Damien said, "until I know it's safe to move her." Claire's heart jumped. "Move me where?" Neither man answered her directly. Damien simply turned back to face her, his expression settling into something steady, almost gentle, in comparison to the coldness she had expected from him only minutes before. "I need you to trust me for one night," he said. "I know that's a difficult thing to ask from a stranger, especially under these circumstances, but the alternative, leaving you exposed in a building that other people already know is occupied tonight, is far more dangerous than anything I'm asking of you." Claire wanted to argue. Every instinct told her to refuse, to demand answers, to insist on some version of normalcy in a night that had stopped making sense the moment the back door locked behind her coworkers. But something in Damien's voice, some quiet certainty beneath the careful control, made her hesitate. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "Then I still won't let anything happen to you," Damien said. "But it will be harder to guarantee, and I don't like making promises I can't guarantee." It was, strangely, the most honest thing anyone had said to her all night. Claire glanced toward the two men still working near the far wall, their movements efficient and practiced, and thought about how ordinary the loading dock might look to anyone glancing in from outside, just a laundry service preparing a late delivery on a stormy evening. Nothing about the scene suggested the quiet danger she now understood was woven through every part of it, hidden behind stacks of towels and the steady hum of industrial machines. "What if I refuse to answer any of your questions?" she asked, testing the boundaries of whatever arrangement was forming between them. "Then I'd respect that," Damien said, "though it would make it harder for me to help you. I can't protect what I don't understand." "Is that what this is? Protection?" "For now," he said. "I'd like it to stay that way." Claire allowed herself to be led toward a back room near the far hallway, one of the frosted glass doors she had wondered about since her first day on the job. Inside, it was smaller than she expected, furnished with a simple desk, a couch pushed against one wall, and a space heater humming quietly in the corner, already running as if someone had anticipated needing it. "Stay here," Damien said. "The door locks from the inside. Use it." "You're trusting me with a locked door?" Claire asked, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. "I'm trusting you to want to be safe," Damien said. "That's different from trusting you completely. I'm not foolish enough to do that yet." He left her there without further explanation, closing the door softly behind him, and Claire heard his footsteps fade back toward the loading dock, back toward whatever remained of the business he had come to finish. She locked the door as instructed, then sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had flooded through her system and refused to fully drain away. For nearly an hour, she heard nothing beyond the muffled sound of voices in the distance, occasionally raised, mostly controlled, the kind of conversation that clearly carried weight she couldn't begin to guess at. She thought about trying her phone again, about calling for help, about 100 different ways this night could go wrong. But some quiet, stubborn part of her kept circling back to the way Damien had spoken to her, the strange, careful honesty beneath his controlled exterior. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't lied to make her comply. He had simply told her the truth, as much of it as he was willing to share, and let her decide whether to trust him with it. It wasn't much to build safety on, but in a night that had taken every ordinary certainty away from her, it was the only thing she had. Sometime later, a soft knock came at the door, careful and deliberate, nothing like the forceful demand she might have expected from a stranger in his position. "It's Damien," came the voice from the other side. "I have coffee, if you want it. The storm isn't letting up. It's going to be a long night." Claire hesitated only a moment before rising to unlock the door, some instinct telling her that whatever waited on the other side of that decision would shape the rest of the night far more than anything that had already happened. Before he opened the door fully, Damien paused, glancing back down the hallway toward the loading dock as though listening for something Claire couldn't hear. Whatever he was checking for, he seemed satisfied, and he pushed the door open the rest of the way, stepping aside to let her see him clearly for the first time, without the harsh emergency lighting of the loading dock distorting his features. He looked younger in the hallway light, and more tired, the kind of tiredness that came from carrying responsibility, rather than from a single long night. Claire noticed the small details she had missed before, the faint scar along his jaw, the way his eyes moved constantly toward exits and corners, even in a moment as ordinary as offering someone coffee. It was a habit, she realized, not caution born of tonight specifically, but a permanent feature of how he moved through the world. "You don't have to trust me completely," Damien said, as though he had read the calculation crossing her face. "I wouldn't trust me completely either, in your position. I only need enough trust to get us both through tonight without anyone getting hurt." Claire studied him for a long moment, weighing the strange, careful honesty in his voice against everything she had witnessed in the last hour. In the end, it was not blind faith that made her decide, but something closer to arithmetic. She had already seen enough to know that resisting him accomplished nothing, and cooperating, at the very least, gave her more information than silence ever would. She was right. She simply didn't yet understand how right she was. When she opened the door, Damien stood there, holding 2 paper cups, steam rising faintly from both, his expression unreadable in the dim hallway light. Behind him, through the frosted glass at the far end of the corridor, she could see the storm still raging outside, whiting out the world beyond the walls that now held them both captive together. "I owe you an explanation," Damien said quietly. "Not all of it, but more than I've given you so far." Claire took the coffee he offered, her fingers brushing briefly against his in the exchange, and found herself nodding despite every warning instinct still humming beneath her skin. "I'm listening," she said. And for the first time since the back door had locked behind her hours earlier, sealing her into a night she never could have predicted, Claire realized she wanted to hear what came next, even if some part of her understood that hearing it might make it impossible to ever walk away unchanged. Damien didn't sit right away. He stood near the doorway of the small back room, turning his paper cup slowly in his hands, as though deciding how much of the truth Claire could hold without breaking under the weight of it. "The laundry service is real," he said finally. "It does what it says it does, but it also moves things for people who need privacy, and pays very well for that privacy to be protected." "What kind of things?" Claire asked, though part of her already suspected she didn't want the answer. "Tonight, it was documents," Damien said. "Not everything that moves through here is dangerous. Some of it is simply business that can't survive being seen by the wrong eyes. Tonight, unfortunately, you were the wrong eyes, even if you never meant to be." Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, grateful for the warmth against her cold fingers. "Grace and Henry, they knew. They left because you told them to." "They work for people who work for me," Damien said. "They didn't have a choice in leaving, any more than you had a choice in staying behind. It was a mistake. Whoever cleared the building assumed everyone had gone home for the holiday. No one checked the back rooms. So this is all just bad luck," Claire said quietly. "For you, yes," Damien said. "Bad luck and bad timing, and a storm that decided tonight was the night to strand half the city." Outside, the wind confirmed his words, rattling the frosted glass hard enough to make Claire flinch. Damien glanced toward the sound, then back at her, something almost apologetic crossing his features, before disappearing again beneath his usual composure. "What happens now?" Claire asked. "To me, I mean." "Tonight, you stay here, where it's safe," Damien said. "Tomorrow, once the road's clear, I'll have someone drive you home myself. As for what happens after that depends on whether I can trust you to keep tonight to yourself." "And if I can't promise that convincingly enough?" Damien's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of consideration that told Claire the question mattered more than he wanted to admit. "Then we'll have a much harder conversation. I'd rather not have it." Claire studied him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the calm, careful man standing in front of her with the kind of danger his business clearly represented. He didn't match the image she might have expected from someone in his position. No raised voice, no open threats, nothing but quiet control and an honesty that felt almost out of place given the circumstances. "Why are you telling me any of this?" she asked. "You could have just locked me in a room and figured out the rest later. You didn't have to explain anything." Damien was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because fear makes people unpredictable. Understanding, Even partial understanding makes them steadier. I need you steady tonight, for both our sakes. It was, Claire thought, a strangely practical kind of kindness, the sort that came from calculation as much as genuine concern. And yet, somewhere beneath the calculation, she sensed something else too, something that made her wonder if Damien was as unaffected by the strangeness of the night as he appeared to be. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said, after a quiet stretch had settled between them. "How does someone end up running a business like this? Were you born into it, or did you choose it?" Damien considered the question longer than she expected, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "A bit of both," he said finally. "My father built most of what I inherited. I spent most of my childhood believing he sold furniture. It took me until I was nearly 17 to understand what the warehouses actually stored, and by then, the choice had already been made for me in every way that mattered." "Do you regret it?" Claire asked. "The life, I mean." "Some days," Damien admitted, with a bluntness that surprised her. "Most days, I simply try to make sure the people under my protection are safer than they would be without me. That's the only justification I've found that lets me sleep at night." Claire nodded slowly, surprised by how easily the conversation had shifted from danger to something closer to honesty. "That's more self-awareness than I expected from a man who locked me in a back room a few hours ago." A faint, tired smile crossed Damien's face, the first genuine one she had seen from him all night. "Fair enough," he said. "I suppose we're both learning things about each other tonight that neither of us expected to learn." "What about your family?" Claire asked. "Do they know you protect strangers when it isn't required of you?" "My family isn't large anymore," Damien said, his voice quieter now. "My father passed a few years ago. My brother handles a different side of the business, further north. Most nights, the people around me are employees rather than family, which makes moments like tonight rare enough to notice." "Is that lonely?" Claire asked, before she could stop herself. Damien considered the question with the same careful seriousness he seemed to give everything. "Sometimes," he admitted, "though I've learned not to dwell on it. Dwelling makes a person careless, and carelessness in my line of work tends to be permanent." Claire nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to about the isolation woven into a life like his, a life built on control and calculation, where trust had to be earned in increments rather than given freely. They talked for a while longer, though Damien kept careful boundaries around what he would and wouldn't explain. He told her enough about the building's true purpose to help her understand the danger without giving her details that might make her more of a target than she already was. He asked about her life outside the laundry service almost as an afterthought, though the questions felt less like polite conversation and more like careful assessment, another piece of the puzzle he was quietly assembling about the woman who had stumbled into his world tonight. Claire found herself answering more honestly than she intended, telling him about her mother waiting for her across town, about the job she had taken because she needed steady income more than she needed a career that made sense, about the quiet, ordinary life she had built for herself before tonight, rearranged everything she thought she understood about the world. Eventually, one of Damien's men appeared at the doorway, murmuring something low enough that Claire couldn't make out the words. Damien's expression shifted almost immediately, the careful calm replaced by something sharper, more alert. "What is it?" Claire asked. "Nothing that concerns you," Damien said, though the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. He stood quickly, setting his half-finished coffee down on the desk. "Stay here. Lock the door again. I'll be back soon." "Damien," Claire said, and he paused at the sound of his name, something in his expression softening briefly despite the urgency of whatever had just interrupted them. "Is something wrong?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I intend to find out." He left quickly after that, and Claire locked the door behind him as instructed, her earlier calm replaced once again by the sharp, uneasy tension that had defined most of the night. She sat alone for what felt like a very long time, listening to muffled voices rising and falling somewhere beyond the walls, unable to make out words but able to sense the shift in tone, the way urgency had crept into conversations that had been calm and businesslike only an hour before. At one point, she heard a car engine outside, followed by the sound of the loading dock door opening, despite the storm still raging beyond it. Voices exchanged sharply, too fast and too low for her to understand, before the engine faded again into the wind. Claire pressed her ear against the door, straining to catch any detail that might explain what was happening, but the thick walls of the building swallowed most of the sound before it reached her. She thought about Damien's warning, about the danger he had described so carefully, about a witness who could get people hurt if the wrong person found out she had been here tonight. She wondered, with a growing unease that settled deep in her chest, whether that wrong person had somehow already found out. When Damien finally returned, nearly an hour later, his expression told her everything she needed to know before he said a single word. The careful composure was still there, but beneath it, something colder had settled in, something that made Claire's pulse quicken the moment she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked immediately. Damien closed the door behind him, checking the lock with a deliberateness that made Claire's stomach tighten further. "Someone knows you're here," he said quietly. "I don't yet know how, but we're not as alone in this building as I thought we were." Claire felt the warmth drain from her hands, despite the cup still cradled between them. "What does that mean for me?" Damien met her eyes directly, and for the first time since the loading dock door had risen to reveal him standing there in his dark wool coat, Claire saw something in his expression that looked less like calculation and more like genuine concern. "It means the plan has changed," he said. "And it means, for tonight at least, you're not just a witness I need to manage anymore. You're someone I need to protect." Outside, the storm howled against the walls of the building, indifferent to the danger closing in around them, and somewhere beyond the frosted glass and the locked doors, Claire understood that whatever safety she had briefly believed in, only an hour ago, had already begun to slip away. Damien moved toward the small window near the desk, angling himself carefully so he could see the parking lot without exposing himself fully to view from outside. Claire watched him check the space methodically, the same quiet efficiency he had shown all night, though now it carried an edge she hadn't seen before, something closer to genuine worry than careful control. "Tell me honestly," Claire said, standing despite the tiredness pulling at her limbs. "How bad is this?" Damien didn't turn from the window right away. "Honestly? I don't know yet. If it's only a rumor reaching the wrong ears, we can manage it quietly by morning. If someone followed my men here tonight, or if someone inside my own organization decided to sell information, it becomes considerably harder to contain. And if it can't be contained?" He turned to face her then, and the look in his eyes told her the truth before his words did. "Then I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure it doesn't reach you. That's not a comfort, I know, but it's the only promise I can make honestly tonight." Claire wrapped her arms around herself, less from the cold in the room than from the weight of everything settling over her at once. A few hours ago, her greatest worry had been getting home before the storm made the roads impassable. Now she stood in a hidden room behind a false wall, listening to a man she had known for less than a night, promise to protect her from danger she still barely understood. "I believe you," she said quietly, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. Damien moved quickly once he explained the situation, his earlier composure replaced by a focused urgency that told Claire more than his words did. Someone outside the organization had learned that the laundry service had been occupied tonight, and worse, that an unplanned witness had been inside the building during the delivery. "How could anyone know that?" Claire asked, following him as he moved toward the desk, and pulled open a drawer she hadn't noticed before, revealing a small radio and a set of keys. "Someone talked," Damien said grimly, "or someone was watching the building tonight without my knowledge. Either way, it doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting you somewhere safer than this room." "Safer than a locked room in a building you control?" Claire asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. "This room has one door and thin walls," Damien said. "If the wrong people come looking for you, it won't hold long enough to matter." The word wrong sent a fresh wave of fear through her, colder and more immediate than anything she had felt earlier that night. "Who exactly is looking for me?" Damien hesitated, and for a moment, Claire thought he might refuse to answer entirely. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, the first genuinely tired gesture she had seen from him all night. "A man named Marco Vitelli runs a rival operation on the east side of the city," he said. "We've had disagreements before, business disagreements, nothing that usually escalates beyond posturing. But if he learns there's a loose end connected to tonight's delivery, someone who could testify to what she saw, he'll use that against me, against my family. You'd become a bargaining piece whether you wanted to be one or not. Claire's knees felt unsteady beneath her. I don't know anything. I don't even know what was in that case. It won't matter to him, Damien said. Perception is often more dangerous than fact in this business. If Marco believes you're a threat to me, that's enough to make you a target. He moved toward the door, gesturing for her to follow, his voice dropping lower, as though the walls themselves might be listening. There's a service corridor that connects this building to the one next door, an old fabric warehouse we also use for storage. It's not well known, even among my own people. If anyone comes looking for you tonight, that's where we'll be safest. Claire followed him without further argument, her earlier hesitation replaced by the simple, practical understanding that survival mattered more right now than questions. They moved quickly through the back hallway, past rooms she had never been permitted to enter, until Damien stopped in front of a section of wall that looked, at first glance, entirely solid. He pressed his palm against a nearly invisible seam, and a section of the wall shifted inward, revealing a narrow passage lit only by a single bare bulb strung along the ceiling. After you, he said. The passage was cold and cramped, smelling faintly of dust and old fabric, and Claire moved through it carefully, aware of Damien close behind her, his presence somehow both reassuring and unsettling in equal measure. The bare bulbs strung along the ceiling flickered occasionally as they walked, casting long shadows that made the narrow space feel even tighter than it already was. How long has this passage existed? Claire asked quietly, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity, though the answer interested her regardless. Longer than I've owned the building, Damien said behind her. My father had it built years before I was born, back when trust between families in this business was even harder to come by than it is now. He used to say a man without a second way out of a room isn't a man who plans to survive very long. Comforting, Claire murmured. It should be, tonight, Damien said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it plainly rather than as a joke. They emerged minutes later into a large, dim storage space filled with stacked bolts of fabric and rolling racks draped in plastic sheeting. Claire ran her hand along one of the fabric bolts as she passed, the fabric cool and smooth beneath her fingers, a small, ordinary sensation that helped steady her against the strangeness of everything else happening around her. Damien moved to check the far corners of the room, his steps quiet and measured, before finally allowing himself to settle near the entrance, close enough to react quickly if anyone attempted to follow them through the passage. Do you trust the men who work for you? Claire asked quietly, watching him check the radio once more. Most of them, Damien said. The ones I don't trust completely, I keep close enough to watch. It isn't a perfect system, but it has kept me alive this long. And tonight? Do you think someone you trusted told Marco where to find you? Damien's jaw tightened slightly. I don't know yet. That question will need answering, once we're both safely past tonight. We'll wait here until my people confirm the building is secure, Damien said, pulling out the small radio from his coat and adjusting its frequency with practiced efficiency. It shouldn't be long. But long or short, the waiting stretched Claire's nerves thinner with every passing minute. She sat on an overturned crate near the center of the room, watching Damien pace slowly along the perimeter, occasionally murmuring into the radio in a low voice she couldn't quite follow. You do this often? She asked eventually, needing something, anything, to break the tense silence. Protecting people who accidentally end up in the middle of your business? Damien paused his pacing, glancing at her with an expression that was difficult to read in the dim light. Never, he admitted. Usually when someone becomes a liability, the solution is simpler and considerably less generous than what I'm offering you tonight. Then why am I different? The question hung in the air between them longer than Claire expected, and for a moment, she thought he might not answer it at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, stripped of the careful control he had maintained since the moment they first met. Because you didn't run, he said. Because you stepped out of the shadows instead of hiding, even though every instinct must have told you to stay hidden and hope we wouldn't find you. That takes a kind of steadiness I don't often see, in this business or outside of it. Claire didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, though something warm and unfamiliar settled briefly in her chest, despite the danger still surrounding them both. The radio crackled suddenly, cutting through the quiet, and Damien's expression sharpened immediately as he raised it to his ear. Claire watched his face carefully, trying to read the news through his reaction, rather than the muffled words coming through the static. "Understood," he said finally, lowering the radio. "Stay sharp, we're not clear yet." "What is it?" Claire asked, rising from the crate, despite the ache building in her legs from sitting so tensely for so long. "Marco's people were seen near the block earlier tonight," Damien said. "My men lost visual in the storm. It's possible they were simply passing through. It's also possible they were looking for exactly what we're trying to protect." Claire's pulse quickened again, the temporary calm of the last few minutes shattering completely. "What do we do?" Damien moved closer, his expression steady despite the tension clearly building beneath it. "We stay quiet, and we stay together, until I know for certain this building is secure. I won't let anything happen to you, Claire. Whatever else happens tonight, I need you to believe that." And strangely, despite everything, despite the danger surrounding them, and the storm still raging outside, and the rival crime boss who might already be searching the streets for a woman he had never met, Claire found that she did believe him, completely and without reservation, in a way that frightened her almost as much as the danger itself. They waited together in the dim storage room, as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the silence between them occasionally broken by murmured updates over the radio, each one tightening the tension in Claire's chest a little further. Somewhere beyond the walls, the storm continued its assault on the city, and somewhere out there in the snow and the darkness, a man neither of them could see was searching for answers that could put both their lives at risk. Claire glanced at Damien, watching the careful focus in his expression, the quiet readiness in the way he stood near the entrance to the passage, prepared to act the moment danger revealed itself. Whatever the rest of the night held, she understood now that she was no longer simply a witness, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had become something else entirely, something tied inescapably to the man standing beside her, and whatever happened next, she suspected there would be no simple return to the ordinary life she had left behind when the back door locked shut, hours earlier, on an evening that was supposed to have been nothing more than a quiet Christmas Eve shift. The radio crackled again, softer this time, and Damien listened intently, his jaw tightening with each passing second. Claire watched him carefully, trying to read the news in his expression, before he had a chance to soften it for her benefit. "Someone's approaching the east entrance," he said finally, lowering the radio. "Slowly, careful. Not the way my own people move when they're simply checking the perimeter." "Marco," Claire said, the name settling like a stone in her stomach, even though she had only just learned it moments before from the radio chatter Damien had murmured half aloud. "Possibly," Damien said, "or someone he sent ahead to confirm what he already suspects. Either way, we need to assume the worst until we know otherwise." He moved closer to her, his voice dropping lower, steady, despite the tension visibly coiling through his shoulders. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, stay behind me, and stay quiet." "Can you do that?" Claire nodded, though her mouth had gone too dry to answer aloud, and together they turned toward the sound of footsteps growing steadily closer beyond the warehouse walls, the fragile safety of the last hour dissolving as quickly as it had been built. The sound came without warning, a heavy crash somewhere near the far end of the storage building, followed by the unmistakable noise of a door being forced rather than opened. Damien moved instantly, pulling Claire behind a tall rack of fabric bolts with a firm but careful grip on her arm. "Stay down," he whispered, "no matter what you hear." Claire crouched low, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard across the room. Through a gap in the fabric racks, she watched Damien move toward the sound, his earlier calm replaced by something sharper, more alert, the posture of a man fully prepared for whatever waited on the other side of the danger closing in. Voices echoed through the warehouse, unfamiliar and tense, at least 3 men by the sound of it, moving carefully between the rows of storage shelves. Claire pressed herself further into the shadows, watching helplessly as Damien positioned himself between her hiding place and the approaching threat, his radio clutched silently in one hand, the other resting near his coat, in a way that made Claire's stomach twist with fear. "Damien Cole," a voice called out, echoing across the open space. "I know you're in here. Let's not waste each other's time on Christmas Eve." Claire recognized the confidence in that voice immediately, the same practiced calm she had heard in Damien's own voice hours earlier, though this version carried something colder beneath it, something far less careful about the harm it might cause. "Marco," Damien said, stepping into view near the center of the room, his voice steady despite the danger clearly surrounding him. "You're a long way from your usual territory tonight." "I heard something interesting," Marco said, his footsteps unhurried as he moved into the dim light spilling from the overhead bulbs. He was shorter than Damien, but broader, with the kind of confident stillness that made Claire's skin crawl even from a distance. "A witness, from your laundry service, someone who saw things they shouldn't have." "You heard wrong," Damien said evenly. "Did I?" Marco's tone sharpened slightly. "Because my sources are usually reliable, and they tell me you've been keeping her very close tonight." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Whoever had told Marco about her had known enough details to make the lie in Damien's voice sound exactly like what it was, a desperate attempt to protect someone he had promised to keep safe. "Even if there was someone," Damien said carefully, "she has nothing to do with your business, or mine beyond tonight. Whatever quarrel you have, it doesn't need to involve an innocent person who happened to be in the wrong place. Innocent people become useful people, in the right circumstances," Marco said, "and right now, I could use some leverage." Claire watched Damien's posture shift, the careful diplomacy in his voice hardening into something far more absolute. "You won't find any leverage here tonight, Marco. Whatever you came for, it isn't in this building." The tension in the room stretched taut enough that Claire could feel it pressing against her chest, even from her hiding place behind the fabric racks. She thought about stepping forward, about ending the standoff before it escalated into something neither man could walk back from, but some instinct told her that revealing herself now would only give Marco exactly what he had come for. Instead, she stayed hidden, watching helplessly as the two men faced each other across the dim warehouse, the fate of the night balanced precariously on words neither of them seemed willing to back down from. "You're protecting a stranger over your own interests," Marco said, something almost curious beneath the challenge in his voice. "That's not like you, Cole." "Maybe I've decided it should be," Damien answered. Marco studied him for a long moment, the silence between them stretching until Claire thought she might scream, simply to break the unbearable tension. Then, slowly, Marco's expression shifted into something that might have been respect, or might simply have been recalculation. "Careful," he said finally. "Sentiment makes men predictable, and predictable men make easy targets." "Noted," Damien said. "Now get out of my building." For a moment, Claire thought Marco might refuse, might push the confrontation toward the violence that had been simmering beneath every word exchanged between them. But eventually, with a final, measuring look toward the shadows where Claire hid, unseen, but perhaps not entirely unsuspected, Marco turned and gestured for his men to withdraw. "This isn't finished," he said as he walked toward the door, "but I'll grant you tonight, Cole. Merry Christmas." The warehouse fell silent once Marco and his men disappeared back into the storm, the only sound the wind still howling against the walls, and the ragged breath finally escaping Claire's chest, held tight through every second of the confrontation. Damien crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside the fabric racks where she still hid, his expression softening the moment their eyes met. "It's all right," he said quietly. "He's gone." "For now," Claire said, her voice shaking despite her attempt to steady it. "For now," Damien agreed. "But we bought time, and time is enough for tonight." He helped her to her feet, and for a moment, neither of them moved, standing close together in the dim, quiet warehouse, the danger that had gripped the night finally beginning to loosen its hold. Claire studied his face, searching for the careful control she had come to expect from him, and found instead something rawer, something that looked almost like relief. "You lied for me," she said softly, "to a man who could have hurt you for it." "I protected someone who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of my world," Damien corrected. "That's different from lying." Claire wasn't sure the distinction mattered as much as he seemed to think it did, but she let it go, too exhausted, and too relieved to argue the point any further. They made their way back through the narrow passage toward the laundry service, the storm outside finally beginning to ease as the night wore on toward its final hours. By the time they reached the small back room where Claire had first been asked to wait, the tension between them had settled into something quieter, something that felt less like fear and more like the fragile beginning of trust neither of them had expected to find on a night like this one. "You should rest," Damien said, though he made no move to leave. "It's been a long night for both of us." "I don't think I can," Claire admitted. "Not yet." They sat together on the small couch, the space heater humming quietly in the corner, and for the first time since the back door had locked hours earlier, Claire allowed herself to simply breathe, to let the adrenaline that had carried her through the night finally begin to fade. Whatever came next, whatever the morning would bring once the storm cleared and the roads opened again, she understood that tonight had changed something permanent between them, something neither the danger, nor the storm, nor the ordinary rules of their separate worlds could fully undo. Morning arrived quietly, the storm finally spent, leaving behind a world blanketed in clean white snow that caught the early light in a way that felt almost gentle after the chaos of the night before. Claire woke to find herself still seated on the small couch, a blanket she didn't remember taking, draped carefully over her shoulders, and Damien sitting nearby at the desk, watching the pale morning light spread slowly across the frosted glass. "You didn't sleep," she said, sitting up slowly, her body stiff from the long, tense hours of the night before. "I didn't think it was wise to," Damien admitted. "Not with Marco's promise still hanging over the morning." Claire studied him carefully, noting the exhaustion beneath his composed expression, the toll the night had clearly taken even on a man so practiced at concealing weakness. "Is it over? Truly over?" "For now," Damien said. "Marco won't move against me openly, not without more leverage than a single witness he never actually confirmed existed. But men like him rarely let go of a grudge completely. We'll need to be careful, for a while at least." "We," Claire repeated softly, testing the word. Damien met her eyes, something steady and certain settling into his expression, despite the exhaustion still lingering there. "I meant what I said last night. I'm not simply going to send you home and pretend none of this happened. You're tied to my world now, whether either of us wanted that or not. I intend to make sure that connection keeps you safe, rather than putting you at further risk." Claire considered his words carefully, weighing the strange, unexpected trust that had grown between them against everything she knew about the danger surrounding a man like Damien Cole. It should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, she found herself thinking of the way he had stood between her and Marco the night before, the way he had lied without hesitation to protect a stranger who had done nothing but stumble into the wrong building on the wrong night. "I don't regret staying quiet in that hallway," she said finally, "even knowing everything that happened afterward." "Most people would," Damien said. "I'm not most people," Claire answered, and something in the small, tired smile that crossed his face told her he already understood that better than she had realized. Later that morning, once the roads had cleared enough for safe travel, Damien arranged for one of his men to drive Claire home, though he insisted on accompanying her himself, unwilling, he admitted, to trust her safety to anyone else so soon after the night they had shared. The drive was quiet, the city slowly waking up around them, decorated windows and quiet streets, a strange contrast to the danger that had unfolded only hours before. When they finally arrived outside her small apartment building, neither of them moved to end the moment right away. "Thank you," Claire said finally, "for protecting me, for trusting me, even when you didn't have to." "Thank you for trusting me back," Damien said. "That mattered more than you probably realize." Claire hesitated at the car door, some instinct telling her that once she stepped out into the ordinary world beyond this strange, dangerous night, the fragile connection between them might dissolve as easily as the storm had finally cleared from the sky. "Will I see you again?" she asked, unable to keep the question from slipping out. Damien studied her for a long moment, something warm breaking through the careful control he wore, like armor, in every other aspect of his life. "I intend to make sure of it," he said. "Consider it a promise, the same kind I made you last night. I don't make those lightly." Claire smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself since the back door had locked shut behind her coworkers, what felt like a lifetime ago. "Then I suppose I'll hold you to it." She stepped out into the crisp morning air, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots, and turned back once more, before heading toward her building. Damien remained in the car, watching until she reached her door safely, the same careful protectiveness he had shown all through the long night, still evident in the quiet way he waited. Inside her apartment, Claire finally allowed herself to sit down and process everything that had happened, the fear and the danger, and the strange, unexpected warmth that had grown between herself and a man she never should have met, in a place she never should have been left alone in, on a night that was supposed to have been nothing more than an ordinary Christmas Eve shift. She thought of Grace and Henry, of the questions she would need to ask them eventually, about how much they had known, how much they had been forced to hide from her over the past 2 months. She thought of Marco Vitelli, and the quiet, unfinished threat still hanging over whatever came next, and she thought of Damien, of the careful, steady way he had chosen to protect her, even when the easier choice would have been to eliminate the risk she represented entirely. A few days later, once the last of the storm had melted from the streets and the city had settled back into its ordinary winter rhythm, Claire returned to Whitmore Linen and Laundry Service to find Grace waiting for her near the front counter, her expression a careful mixture of guilt and relief. "I'm so sorry," Grace said before Claire had even taken off her coat. "I didn't know what else to do. When Damien's people tell you to leave, you leave. I should have found a way to warn you first. I should have made sure you got out too." "You could have told me the truth about this place a long time ago," Claire said, though there was no real anger left in her voice, only tiredness and a kind of understanding she hadn't expected to feel so soon. "Would you have believed me?" Grace asked quietly. Claire considered the question honestly. "Probably not," she admitted. "Not until I saw it for myself." Henry appeared from the back room a moment later, looking similarly relieved to see her standing there, unharmed and apparently unshaken by everything that had happened. Neither of them asked for details about the night, and Claire offered none, understanding instinctively that some things in this building were better left unspoken between people who wanted to keep working here safely. Damien visited later that week, arriving not through the back loading dock but through the front door, in plain daylight, dressed less like a man conducting dangerous business and more like someone stopping by to see a friend. Claire watched him cross the main floor toward her, noting the way Grace and Henry both straightened slightly at his presence, old habits of respect and caution that no longer applied quite the same way to her. "I wanted to see how you were settling back in," he said, when he reached the folding table where she stood. "Better than I expected," Claire admitted, "though I keep waiting for the storm to come back." "It won't, not tonight," Damien said. "Marco has agreed to keep his distance, for now. It cost more than I would have liked, but it was worth every bit of it." Claire studied him carefully, searching for the exhaustion that had marked his face during the long night they had shared, and found instead something steadier, something that looked almost like peace. "And after tonight? After this week?" "After that," Damien said, "I intend to keep the promise I made you. All of it, not just the part about keeping you safe." Claire smiled, setting down the towel in her hands, and for the first time since the back door had locked shut behind her coworkers on a Christmas Eve she would never forget, she allowed herself to believe fully in the strange, unlikely warmth that had grown from the coldest night of her life. Whatever the coming days held, whatever danger still lingered from a business she had never asked to be part of, Claire understood with quiet certainty that the ordinary life she had built for herself before this Christmas Eve was gone, replaced by something far more uncertain, far more dangerous, and somehow, despite everything, far more alive than anything she had known before. Outside her window, the snow continued falling softly over the quiet city, covering the tracks of the night before, and somewhere across town, in a world she was only beginning to understand, a man who had once been a stranger was already thinking of ways to keep the promise he had made her, certain that whatever came next, their story was only just beginning.